Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you are having a wonderful time. This is a friendly reminder that our next session will begin shortly. Please make your way back to the ballroom and take your seats. We have an exciting lineup of speakers and activities that you don't want to miss. Thank you, and we will be starting soon. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you are having a wonderful time. This is a friendly reminder that our next session will begin shortly. Please make your way back to the ballroom and take your seats. We have an exciting lineup of speakers and activities that you don't want to miss. Thank you, and we will be starting soon. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you are having a wonderful time. This is a friendly reminder that our next session will begin shortly. Please make your way back to the ballroom and take your seats. We have an exciting lineup of speakers and activities that you don't want to miss. Thank you, and we will be starting soon. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to begin our next session, Multi-Stakeholder Norm Setting and Internet Governance. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this segment, Samiran Gupta, Vice President Government and IGO Engagement APAC and Stakeholder Engagement South Asia ICANN. Please join me in welcoming Samiran Gupta to the stage.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. And I hope you've got your tea, coffee, whatever you require to stay awake for the next couple of hours, right? So, welcome back to the APAC DNS Forum. We are in parallel track session 3A, which is the multi-stakeholder norm setting and internet governance. We've got a couple of panelists in the room with us and a couple of panelists joining online. I'm going to give you a little introduction to who they are. Seated on my right, immediate right, is Jennifer Chung, Director of Corporate Knowledge, Asia organization. Welcome, Jennifer. On my extreme right is Ian Sheldon, Director of Internet Governance Team, Australia's Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Communications, and the GAC representative from Australia. Welcome, Ian. Online, we've got Adrian Wan, who is a Senior Manager, Policy and Advocacy, Internet Society. Welcome, Adrian. I hope you can hear us. Hi, Adrian. And then on my right shoulder, looking at us from all the way from New Delhi, India, is Amrita Choudhury, Director, CCAOI. Good to see you, Amrita. welcome. So we are going to start this off with a round of questions that I have for our panelists. I'll request them to keep their interventions to about 7 to 8 minutes, under 10, right? And then based on their responses, I'm going to come back and ask them a quick question, after which we will open it up for questions from the floor. So with that, let me kick it off with a quick introduction to the topic. So the World Summit on Information Society, which is popularly known as WSIS, had a set of meetings in 2003 and 2005. The meeting in 2005, which was held in Tunis, kind of enshrined the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. And it's popularly known as the Tunis Agenda. And over the last 2 decades, this model has worked for internet governance, and we've had countries, nation states using the internet for economic development and such like. But through this period, we've also had many nations calling for a different approach to internet governance, where really it's more of a multilateral approach where governments talk to each other rather than all stakeholders being present. So with that background, we've got an excellent panel of speakers with a lot of experience in this area and doing a lot of work as we speak. And I'm going to kick this off with Adrian. My question to you, Adrian, is that ISOC follows these discussions related to the internet governance issues closely. As the first speaker for today, can you share with us an overview of how the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance came about, including the role of WSIS? Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Samiran. It's great to see you and a fellow panelist again, and really sad that I can't be with you in Bali this week, but it's a privilege to join you virtually nonetheless. Thank you for the question, Samiran. Indeed, what you said about WSIS and the multi-stakeholder model was correct. And I'd like to just step back a bit and answer the question from give a historical perspective to it. Indeed, openness and transparency were hallmark of the internet from very early in its development, in contrast to the standardization processes surrounding some of the other communication technologies competing for dominance in the 1980s or 1990s. And like Samiran, you said, it wasn't until the World Summit on the Information Society, WSIS, process in the early 2000s that the term multi-stakeholder really entered the internet governance lexicon. So since then, it become a recurring element in internet governance discussions, and not least in the report of the Working Group on Internet Governance that was formed between two WSIS phases in 2003 and 2005. And there was another key WSIS outcome document, the 2005 Tunis Agenda, which you just mentioned, Samiran. Tunis Agenda for the Information Society that mentioned in relation to internet governance that a multi-stakeholder approach should be adopted as far as possible at all levels, and that multi-stakeholder participation is essential to the successful building of a people-centered, inclusive, and development-oriented information society. So that really is at least the first agreed and documented start of the use of the word multi-stakeholder. In addition to that, in the WIS's Declaration of Principles in 2004, it acknowledged that bridging the digital divide and ensuring harmonious, fair, and equitable development for all will require strong commitment by all stakeholders. So it's something that can't be dealt with by one single stakeholder group, can't be dealt with, can't be done by the government alone or by the technical community alone. So it also said that the management of the internet encompasses both technical and public policy issues and should involve all stakeholders and relevant intergovernmental and international organizations. By that time, most people felt that the internet offered incredible potential for economic and social development. If it could have a more comprehensive global coverage, people assumed it would go on to connect the entire world at that time. And people also recognized that the internet's growth and success up to that point in the early 2000s, particularly in technical and business terms, have been grounded in open governance processes. Indeed, till today, the WIS's focus is still firmly on extending the benefits of internet access to the still many underserved, remote, rural people. That is why these processes are still so important today. And any attempts to disrupt or undermine these processes will risk jeopardizing the internet's continued growth. Thinking back on the internet's massive growth in the past decade, it's clear that the internet did not have a global, centralized expansion plan mapped out by a central authority. What happened was simply that the internet grew organically from one country to the next, simply because people saw the value of it and saw the potential for economic and social development. And the internet was designed to do this easily because it's a network of networks. It's a building block that anyone can build on top of. But I think we'll get onto this later. But I'll just give a brief description here. That of course, the multi-stakeholder model or approach, as we call it, has evolved over the years, and will continue to evolve over time. In earlier UN meetings, there used to be something called a tripartite model of stakeholder categories, namely government, private sector, and civil society. Depending on the setting now, there are more groups than at that time. There is academia as a distinct group. There's also internet technical community, which houses organizations like Internet Society and ICANN. So that is why it's the term that I've spent a few minutes to explain how the term came about and why it still remains so important. And I look forward to hearing from the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. We'll come back to you in due course of the afternoon. Let me go to Ian. Ian, being a part of the government who may have insights on processes that non-state stakeholders might not be privy to, can you share with us the lay of the land on ongoing multilateral processes that are relevant to internet governance, such as the WISIS Plus 20 and the GDC, keeping in mind that a lot of the community members are actually not directly engaged in these processes? Ian?
Thank you, Samiran. I think the first thing I'll mention is the UN system at present is facing a reasonably large period of change. A lot of member states the UN in particular are rethinking the role of the UN in the broader future. That's the bigger picture piece here that I think is important to bear in mind as we talk about internet governance within the broader UN landscape. So one of the processes that has been ongoing through this year and is currently still ongoing is the Global Digital Compact. So the Global Digital Compact is an initiative from the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, and seeks to outline shared principles for an open, free, secure digital for all. The co-facilitators are Sweden and Zambia, and the process has waxed and waned over the last couple of months as we've worked our way through various drafts. There were some open consultation processes earlier in the process where member states, as well as a breadth of other interested stakeholders and the broader community, could provide inputs. And then a range of those inputs were absorbed and a draft was created. Various versions of those drafts were negotiated in New York, and up until maybe about a week or so ago, we were reasonably close on consensus. There were still some member states who were unhappy, and so as of this week, we're still trying to work through some of those smaller, finer points. The GDC, the compact itself, seeks to cover topics like AI, data governance, online harms, financing, capacity building, and it's also got one section on internet governance. The other final section I'll draw your attention to is some of the follow-up and implementation of the compact itself. There's been a lot of discussion around the role of the IGF and how much the Internet Governance Forum should or should not play a role in the implementation follow-up of what's in the document. The Global Digital Compact will then feed into what's known as the Summit of the Future later this year, which is that broader process which seeks to reevaluate what the UN system looks like, and that'll be worked through in the General Assembly sometime later this year. It's still not clear what some of those broader processes will look like, but we're still working our way through the Global Digital Compact negotiations at present. Looking further afield, and we heard a little bit about the history of the World Summit on the Information Society. This process will be reviewed at the 20-year juncture sometime next year. The modalities for this are unclear. It's still not completely transparent what that review process will look like, but it does have the potential to revisit some of those foundational principles around the Internet Governance Forum and some of the core Internet governance principles which we'd agreed decades ago. And I think further afield, we've also got broader processes like the Sustainable Development Goals being reviewed in 2030. So that's a real big picture piece where the role of the internet will play quite a large role in looking to realise a lot of those big picture, longer term achievements that we as a planet should be striving towards. And so there's quite a number of quite large tectonic shifts happening over this space, and I think it's quite important that this region continue to pay attention to what's happening in the UN, so we can get involved and help shape those discussions to see an internet that better serves all of our varied needs. I might pause there, and we can certainly talk about UN processes all day, but...
Thank you, Adrian. Sorry, Ian. Amrita, we've heard that after many rounds of debate, the multi-stakeholder model came out as the chosen approach for internet governance. And we've also heard the criticism of the model, that is, it is not very perfect, but it is still that model which is viable for norm setting, development for internet governance. And why is that so? I presume that you agree that it is the model, and therefore why is it so? If you could just give us your rationale on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Samiran, and thank you for inviting to speak on this. Yes, I do support the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance. And before I say that why it should be there, perhaps I need to, coming from a developing country, civil society entity looking at end user interests, I would say that if you look at today's scenario, that internet and digital technology has actually become all pervasive, and it impacts the life of all of us across the globe. It affects the lives of governments, societies, economies, individuals, end users, and even non-internet users. And this impact may vary between different people and stakeholders. And that is why when policies or regulations or frameworks are made at national, regional, or even international level, or even the UN, as Ian was mentioning, related to internet governance, the interests and perspectives of all the stakeholders should be considered so that a nuanced decision can happen. Sometimes when decisions are unilaterally taken by governments with very good intent, at times it has a very myopic or one-sided perspective, which can lead to lopsided regulations, and which may also have unintended adverse effects. However, if all stakeholders are taken together, their views are taken into consideration, a transparent process has been followed, and then decisions are made, they have been found to be more balanced, and also the stakeholders have a more buy-in to it. The additional part is that each stakeholder group brings with it its own expertise, and that expertise can be leveraged in creating a balanced regulation, or even something which countries agree to. So that is one thing why we still need the multi-stakeholder model, not because it will help, it brings others to the table, but it will also help governments or even the UN to make a balanced, decision. If you look at it, as Adrian also mentioned, multi-stakeholder model has evolved over years, and depending upon the requirement of the process or organization, different formats of it is used. For example, if you look at ICANN, the multi-stakeholder approach of having different SOACs is quite different from what is adopted at the IETF, for example. However, the key essence in all these models is that all stakeholders are taken into views are taken into consideration when decisions are made. But we also need to be cautious of claims of adopting multi-stakeholder approach, when in reality, these processes may not be following it. For example, Ian was mentioning about the GDC, which actually claims to be to have adopted a multi-stakeholder approach. But in my opinion, not all stakeholders had genuine equal footing. And as you mentioned, Samiran, multi-stakeholder model is not perfect. There are power asymmetries between different stakeholder groups. Civil society has always said that some communities are, more represented than others, or the processes are not inclusive, or there is a higher learning curve, especially for developing countries who are new to this process. But the processes can be improved. For example, earlier this year, we had the Net Mundial Plus 10 discussions, and there was a multi-stakeholder statement which came out, and there is a section called the Sao Paulo Multi-Stakeholder Guidelines, which actually provides guidance on how to improve the multi-stakeholder process of decision-making and consensus building. If you want, I can share the link, over chat. Also, it calls for building capacity, inclusion, having a more open decision-making, having meaningful and accountable participation at equal footing, etc., which actually could be the norms that any process could have as checklists to improve the process. And lastly, I would say that it is important that we keep in mind that the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance actually has worked successfully over the years, and we are able to enjoy an open, accessible, and resilient internet. our job now is to strengthen it more, especially the voices of non-government actors, including the end users and even the interests of non-users, which needs to be protected and promoted so that we can actually have the multi-stakeholder model we cherish. And we need to be involved. I think that is very important for this model to evolve and to work, because I would say no decision should be taken without us being in the table. So I'll end it at there, Samiran, for now.
Thank you so much, Amrita. And you touched upon something which is actually my next question to Jennifer. So Amrita mentioned that there are different versions of the multi-stakeholder model. So Jennifer, as a registry operator, Asia, can you share with us some of the models that, as a registry operator you've witnessed, and how do you think these models can be improved? I mean, Amrita did mention that there is an evolutionary process and there are guidelines which are now available in the public domain, but as a registry operator, what is your view? How can these processes be improved?
Thanks, Samiran. I feel like Amrita gave me the perfect setup. I promise we didn't actually coordinate this beforehand, so it was actually really good to have Amrita talk about it a little bit. I guess if we're talking about from a registry point of view, or maybe .Asia is a little bit different from many other registries who participate in ICANN, that we do participate quite a lot in internet governance fora and also the different venues where this is being discussed. I think the first, I guess, flavor, I like to call it different flavors of multi-stakeholder model. I don't know why you think about it as flavors. Maybe ice cream is making me think about flavors. But the one that's closest to, I think, people in the room and also remotely would be ICANN. ICANN itself, the way we make policy. This is a multi-stakeholder bottom-up consensus policy making, specifically, obviously, on the affects the contracted parties. We are the ones who are looking towards having this consensus policy, big C, big P, then being, in our contractual obligations. And actually the very first time that the contracted parties during the summit earlier this year in Paris, we had the first statement that we came out with, and the very first point was, and I'm going to read this because I think it's actually quite important. It says that we're going to continuing to support and work through the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance, specifically within the policymaking context of ICANN, to maintain and enhance the security, stability, and resiliency of the global domain name system. And I think this is the first time, the CPH has come together and say, yeah, this is what we do, and we want to defend and strengthen this multi-stakeholder model. So this is probably the one that is closest to everyone here to understand. The way we make policy in ICANN itself is a multi-stakeholder bottom-up way of working. It is policy making. The second flavor of multi-stakeholder model I want to talk about really is the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum. And it's interesting to note that it's not a decision-making forum. It's a decision-shaping forum. And I love to make this nuance because it's really important to note that the IGF has received a lot of criticism through the years saying, oh, it's a talk shop, you only talk about it, you don't really make any decisions, there's no negotiated text out of it. But I would reckon to say this in itself is the value of the IGF, that different stakeholders can come together on equal footing to talk about very thorny and often very contentious internet governance issues. And without the, I guess, the pressure of having to negotiate a text at the end, you would be more forthcoming. Even governments and other big tech would be more forthcoming to sit down at the table to actually discuss a way forward. And I think this is very valuable. And if you want to think about the decision-shaping part of the IGF, you also need to look into the national and regional initiatives. That is the global network. I think right now we're 170 and counting initiatives. These different NRIs, they actually affect the policy in their home economies. I think in the Africa region, they've also, some of the regulations that have been passed have been discussed in their local meetings. And I think this also is very valuable. The third flavor I want to kind of touch on briefly, and I don't have personal experience in it, but I'm sure people in the room, and I'm looking around, I see the RIRs have their way of working, and it is multi-stakeholder. The way they make decisions, the way they look at policy, the way they make policy is also that way. And I see some APNIC people around here that also participate in the RIR policy-making processes, which is also very interesting. I'd encourage people to go and ask them more about it. And then the final flavor of multi-stakeholder model, and I say it with a little bit of a caveat, because I think they definitely proclaim that they are, and I don't want to say they aren't. So this year, I went to the WSIS Forum. It's the high-level event before the Plus 20 review, and there was a lot of interest, especially at this forum, because there was a lot of excitement going on, seeing what is going to happen, what is the process. I think we heard earlier from Ian, there is no kind of clear process just yet. Hopefully, friendly governments will let us know what the process might be for non-government stakeholders to be able to meaningfully input into this. So the WSIS Forum is interesting because they do say that they are multi-stakeholder. And of course, the WSIS action lines is broader than just internet governance. It is a lot to do with ICT for development. There's a lot of ethics of emerging technology. In fact, this year, they very much embraced I think the AI for Good Summit, and it was very interesting, very big turnout there, a lot of industry there as well. I think their flavor of multi-stakeholder, I guess, process or model is interesting in that they showcase a lot of multi-stakeholder successes. And it's also interesting to see a lot of high-level participation and also a lot of industry participation that don't normally come to the other forums that we see, for example, the IGF or even ICANN. So having this broad spectrum of what multi-stakeholder model might be and can be is quite interesting. There's no definitive, I guess, definition of this has to be this way, but the way that the different institutions and processes adapt this way of working to suit their best needs, I think this is also the value of multi-stakeholder model.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And you're not done, actually.
Oh, I'm not done.
No, you're not done. We are going to cycle back in reverse order. So you kind of shared with us the four examples of models, okay? Going forward, given that there are some pressures where, the model does come under pressure from, governments or even regulators, as the case might be, what is your recommendation as part of the industry, the registry industry, on how best to coordinate, because you can't just be in one place, or do you need to be in multiple places? What is your strategy?
That's a very loaded question, Samiran. I think we're still finding...
As much as you can tell us.
Of course, I'm happy to. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it at length, but I know that we only have a limited time. I guess the short answer is we leverage the different resources we have. .Asia is part of the technical community. ICANN is part of the technical community. I know that people here in the room and also online already know that they have the WSIS Plus 20 mailing list and the different webinars that they do to inform the community of what's going on. And of course, there's also the more kind of a grounds-up technical community coalition on multi-stakeholderism. I always get this wrong, the TCCM. So it was started by several CCTLDs. I think it was AUDA, Internet NZ, Nominet, and CIRA, and now has grown to encompass a lot more on the registries and registrars. To look at how technical community itself can input into sometimes quite opaque processes like the GDC, and to be able to actually showcase this is how multi-stakeholder works. This is a bottom-up. This is not top-down at all. This is a community saying this is the way we work. That we want this to continue to work this way. I think a lot of us, and I think also that. Adrian mentioned this in the beginning. Throughout the history, it used to be tripartite. So technical community wasn't included. Last year, there was a joint blog that was written by Sally and Paul, and I think, I'm missing the last one. Aaron, I think, yep, John wrote it as well, about how technical community is actually very instrumental to internet governance. We, as a technical community, we're the ones who make sure everything underneath works. And I think there's also this notion that, don't break what isn't broken. We are inherently part of a coordination of the network of networks, and this is how the internet evolved. This is how we work. So if you look at the multi-stakeholder model, and I guess a lot of the registries do as well, I mean, the larger registries participate because they have the resourcing to participate, but I also say that, industry-wise or technical community-wise, we also leverage the others who participate in, for example, the Plenipot, to, for example, participate in the open-ended working group on cyber. There's a lot of different processes right now that kind of straddle between multilateral processes, where I like to call them little oases of multi-stakeholder consultative process. I think that we need to work where the system allows us to work. Of course, in the most utopian ideal is that it can be open, it can be easy for us to do that, but in order to get to that point, we also need to leverage the opportunities that we're able to get to that point as well.
Thank you so much. Amrita, I come back to you. So you're obviously a supporter of the multi-stakeholder model. You've told us about it. Now, let's look at the reverse for a moment. If the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance were to be removed or minimized, what would this mean to the digital divide and internet inclusivity and growth, and in developing countries in particular? Because you also stressed on the fact that you kind of represent the voice of a developing region. So, what is the challenge you would think we would face?
Again, it's a loaded question. We cannot solve the world's problem today, but I'll just attempt to make a few points which come to my mind. The interests within developing countries also differ. The interest of someone who does not have internet, for example, in India, would be slightly different from someone who has access to internet in India and is having a different issue. So if we want, and that is within a country, and it would be very different. A landlocked country would have more issues than say even a Pacific island, for example. So the interests of different stakeholders have to come in. For example, we have the SDG goals which have been going on. Unfortunately, we have not been able to meet any of the SDG goals. But if we want them to work, we also have to find out where the issues are, why it didn't work, and that can only happen when we have those voices come into the discussion and say, this works, this doesn't. A simple example, many a times in many countries, when regulations to protect women are actually brought in, women are not in the room. Or when issues related to disabled people are being discussed, there are no people with disability who are involved. But if you really want that to work, you will have to have people in the room. Many a times, and I don't blame the governments, they do have the interest of the sovereign interest or the interest of their people. However, many times there is a fear that if someone is opposing or bringing in a diverse view, it is incorrect or it is against them. Actually, we need to have more collaboration or talks so that that myth can be removed. It can be that, it is not that anyone is against anyone, but the different interests can come together and work together. However, if you stop people from coming and actually even giving their views on a particular thing, it's not going to work. Simple example is, if you look at, there is a CSAM issue going on. Governments and law enforcement definitely want to address that. And for that, they are wanting conversations into even in encrypted platforms to come to have the access. While the thought is good that it will help them to protect children, but on the other hand, there is a greater harm that protected platforms through which conversation can go, which can keep people secure, would become insecure. And adverse effect people could also, take, and since we see so much of cyber attacks, even nation-sponsored attacks, etc., it would make those platforms unsecure. And even the children have not been asked what they want. Where are the children's rights coming into the entire discussion? So I think these are complex issues. Just one stakeholder attempting to understand it or trying to take decisions would actually be disastrous in the long run, I would say. I would go to say disastrous. So I think it is in the interest of the governments also to take into consideration the views of other stakeholders. For example, in the GDC, you have access, reducing digital divide. You're talking about AI governance. Now, if you're talking about misinformation, disinformation, or even data governance, or data flows, etc. Now, governments don't manage that. It is the private entities who manage it. It is the end users who are working on it. It is the technical community who are managing it. If governments decide upon it without the buy-in of how actually the entire technology or business flows, it's not going to get success. So if the adverse thing happens, I think even governments would not be able to achieve what they want to achieve. I would leave it at that, Samiran.
Excellent point, Amrita. Ian? So how would you suggest, picking up from where Amrita left off, how do you suggest that the multi-stakeholder model coexist with the multilateral process? You obviously work with the government, and how do you see the two systems actually coexisting?
Thanks. It's a good question. I think a lot of my response was actually covered by both Jen and Amrita in the last two questions. But I mean, I think really come back to and continue to find those oases within multilateral processes where the multi-stakeholder community does have a foothold. Certainly countries like Australia will continue to advocate for broadening out of these processes to include multi-stakeholder communities and systems. But it'll be a process we'll need to continue to go through. I mean, the multi-stakeholder system and the multilateral system have coexisted and continue to work together, have worked together for the last couple of decades. And I think as the internet continues to grow, those two communities will inevitably need to continue to work more closely together. So I think I've got a couple of general points I wanted to make here. Be proactive in working with respective governments. The multi-stakeholder community, and I'm referring to all of you in the room here, get to know your local governments, get to understand what some of their objectives are, and continue to provide the advice that I know all of you have on these deeply technical matters related to the internet. And when you reach out to your governments, learn about those multilateral processes. They can be quite complex and convoluted. So be informed, learn about how they operate, learn about where those oases will emerge. And when you do engage in those oases, make sure you are clear-eyed on what the challenges are and how the multi-stakeholder community can work through those consensus positions. And when you've reached those consensus positions, bring them into the multilateral oases and share those with the government reps. Governments like a clear, direct, understandable message. So when you do come, work through the system that exists here and present a clear, consensus-driven solution. I think a lot of governments think about multi-stakeholderism, and I think it's a mystical process, but at its very core, it's about de-risking and it's about engaging stakeholders, and it shares a lot of the same commonalities with just good policy processes. So I think at its fundamental level, governments can find common touch points with these systems, understand them, and work through the same processes to get a good outcome for everyone. So I think I think there's also a little bit of work to do on the multilateral side as well to better understand this community, find those relationships, build out those trusted systems and connections, and continue simply talking and maintaining trust between the two systems. And the final point I'll make is that there are quite a number of GAC reps here in the room and across the REIC. They are your critical bridging points. They come to these multi-stakeholder discussions, and they also have connections back into the multilateral world as well. Find those touch points, make sure you're connected to them, and make sure your expertise is influencing the conversations that are happening in the UN.
Thank you so much, Ian. So you're broadly saying that take the opportunity to actually go and have that conversation, right? Whether you're private sector,
Yes.
your civil society, and likewise for governments or government representatives to actually reach out and try to engage.
That's right. I think we're in the business of the internet, and as we heard this morning, the internet's about communication.
Yep.
And I think clear communication is what will see us through these processes.
Thank you so much. Adrian, we come to you, and I'm picking up from something that Jennifer mentioned, which is the technical community, and how the technical community became part of the multi-stakeholder model, and the fact that last year you referred to the blog that Sally co-authored with a couple of other, internet sort of community members on protecting the technical community's role. So, Adrian, what do you think needs to happen to just make people understand that it's not business as usual? What you don't get to see, what's under the hood is what you don't get to see, and how do you actually create that awareness? You're with ISOC, and how does ISOC kind of look at this? It'd be very good for us to know. Adrian?
Thank you, Samiran. The short answer is it's important to understand what makes the internet so valuable, and we have to try our best to protect and defend those features as much as we can. But I'll give you a slightly longer answer and get back to this point. There's a quote that goes something like this. Just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. I believe there are different versions of that quote running around, but the essence is like that. And as our panelists have mentioned, there are tensions between this multi-stakeholder approach and a more multilateral government-driven approach. Jen and Amrita mentioned a few multi-stakeholder processes that are decision-making, like ICANN, like the regional internet registry community, like and also the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, and also those that are decision-shaping, like the IGF. These are no exception to that rule. Politics will come to you. And increasing geopolitical tensions and superpower rivalry are testing government's commitment to the existing multi-stakeholder approach and raising the question of whether trust in this multi-stakeholder environment can survive in this cutthroat, competitive environment. And which brings me to my point earlier about Samiran, you asked what we are to do in this environment. It's important to understand what makes the internet so useful, so valuable over the past decades. In the internet society, there are a few essential features of the internet that we call critical properties. It's key to understand it for us all, because as internet governance debates find a way into legislative chambers, knowing a bit about how the internet works and the essential features can help prevent politically or financially motivated initiatives having serious technical or operational impact on the internet infrastructure. And that is why a session like this today is so meaningful for the entire industry. We're working to ensure that the success of the multi-stakeholder approach is more widely understood. The multi-stakeholder approach is key if we are to build, operate, and rely upon an open, global, secure, and trustworthy internet, not just for us, but also for our future generations. I'll pause here and hand back to you, Samiran.
Thank you, Adrian. So I think it's time for us to open the session for questions from the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand and we will send a microphone to you. And I see one hand. Get a mic. Do you have a microphone?
Hi. Thank you everybody for your views, very enlightening. My question is about the different entities that are trying to play a role in internet governance, and the question is it because they believe, and which is true, that something is broken and only they can fix it, or is it because they are feeling left out and just want to play a role in this space?
Who would like to take this? Amrita? Go for it.
So, Vivek, just to respond to you, and this is my take, I may also be not fully correct. It is because internet today has become all pervasive. There are issues which are there. If you look at it, policies have been framed by Global West, and the rest of the world is now getting into internet, using it in a different way, and are finding that their voices were never represented, and their interests were never taken into account. And that is why countries from global south, or global majority as we call it, want to have their voices heard. Similarly, when technology started, it started in global north or in just a few countries. However, it is being used in different ways in different countries now. So there has been a power asymmetry, and that is why governments across the globe want to have a say in it. We have had various revelations, for example, the Pegasus, the Snowden revelation, where we have seen there have been a lot of, I would say, state actor play also, or even big tech, playing. If you look at the power the big tech yields today is tremendous. Many times, for small governments, they don't even listen to small governments. So in those situations, even the governments think that, yes, there needs to be regulation, and the only way they think of it sometimes of the internet is close the tap or let me have access to the tap, not realizing that it works in a different way. So there are legitimate needs, and that is why people are looking at it. Also, governments realize that internet also gives power to the people, which can be used for them, against them. So everyone is wary. It also helps to build economy, so there is money out there. And every country wants to build their own economy, their digital economy. So there are interests legitimate, there are concerns legitimate. However, many times, when you just look at your own interest and when you're not looking at some global interests, the challenges of fragmentation, etc., come in. So, and that is what I would say. I don't know if I've been able to answer your question, but that's how I look at it.
Thanks so much, Amrita. I saw a question in the chat room, if that can be just put back on the screen, please. Thank you. This is Mabda from the Habitat's Habibie Center, Indonesia. Ian raised an important point about engaging with local governments. However, there are places where engaging with can be very difficult, and that multi-stakeholderism is defined through a very state-centric lens. How can constituents situated in such places be better represented and heard? Is there a best practice we can learn from? Ian? Go for it.
Look, it's a fantastic question. It's something that has been posed to me and other governments for quite a number of years, and I think gatherings like these ones are the perfect place to start, where there are a breadth of other governments who are listening and are paying attention, and we are able to talk to other governments as peers. So in some instances, maybe your local government doesn't have your ear, but there will be a plurality of other governments who are very interested in hearing your thoughts. I can speak very frankly, Australia is one of those. I'm very keen to hear and leverage all of the expertise that I can get my hands on. And I'm very happy to talk to my peers in the GAC, and ICANN, and share those thoughts and opinions and expertise. And in turn, I'm very happy to share that expertise with my colleagues in New York, who may look at doing the same as well. So I think it's probably not a clean answer to your question, because certainly, and coming back to the previous question, there is a perception that internet governance is done by governments. And so there's a real kind of mismatch, and in some ways, a lot of governments see the critical central role that they play in a lot of these spaces, and that will forever be ingrained in the way that they operate. But there are many other governments and many other sympathetic voices who are very keen to hear your opinion. And like I said before, when you find those oases, when you find that sympathetic connection, use it, return to it, because governments globally will be talking to each other. And it's my sincere hope that when you do share that opinion, it's not into the void.
Got it. You want to add? Jennifer, please.
Kind of tying the two questions together. Sure. I thought that was a really great question from Mabda, and thanks, Ian, for that really considered response. And I want to note Vivek's question as well, because Mabda's question is evidenced why it's important to have a multi-stakeholder model of governance, because there are going to be places where it is a multilateral structure where you don't actually have a voice. And I think, harkening back to what Amrita and her very considered response to you as well, is that this is the way that the internet throughout history has worked. And also, if you take away saying, oh, I trust my government, 100% to make the decisions on everything on me, that's a valid, response to it. But there are other places and other situations where you're going to find that it is important for you to have a voice and a seat at the table. And this is why we're having this discussion.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Is there one last question? We've got 1 minute and 25 seconds remaining. Would somebody like to ask a question? I thought Mary just was raising her hand, but no, she wasn't. Okay. All right. If there are no questions, I would request the audience in the room to give the panelists a round of applause. We are finishing well on time. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Amrita. Thank you, Adrian, for joining online. Thank you.
Ya dim, gini dim. Nah. Ini laptop punya siapa nih?